Hello. Hi. Wow, what a turnout today. Oh, I've been looking for this. It's amazing. In life, everything you look for appears. Okay. Is there lights in here? Nobody would expect light issues to be installed. If I'm taking it on the side of my peripheral vision. Okay. Oh, okay. You can see me. No, it's still there. You can sit there. It's okay. Okay. Okay, so two of you. Exciting. So today we're going to carry on talking about the Tractatus. And I wanted to talk about kind of 4 different types of strings of letters. Yeah, so we could have gobbly goo goo. I just made that up. We could have I don't know. This is red. Lucas is happy. We could have the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And we can have either it is raining or it is not raining. Okay, so 4 types of sentences. Or not sentences. 4 strings of symbols. No, not even symbols. 4 strings of letters. Yeah. Gobbly-goo-goo. I just made that up. This is nonsense. Easy. Doesn't mean anything. We've got a bunch of letters, but they're put together in such a way that they they completely lack meaning. This is red. Lucas is happy. These are going to be in kind of in our kind of pre-Wittgensteinian language. We might think these are going to be kind of contingent through empirical or contingent in true or false empirical claims. For Wittgenstein, these are going to be elementary propositions with sense. Yeah. So these are going to be elementary propositions with sense, or something like this. Not obvious. Lucas is happy. Is Lucas really a name? Is it a disguised description? You know, we could go Russellian, but we have elementary propositions with sense. And these such propositions, what do? They sort of picture the world. They sort of describe a state of affairs, which could either exist or not exist. Yeah. So these are things that are possibly true, possibly false. Wittgenstein thinks that any elementary proposition with sense, is a proposition with empirical content. And what it means to have empirical content means that it could be false. Yeah. So any proposition that has content, this one could be false, which describes some way that the world could be. Yeah. And so any proposition like this is only going to be contingently true. Any proposition with sense has to be such that it's only contingently true. So no propositions like this will be necessary. Okay. And then we've got a couple of other types of propositions. We have propositions like, we have other stringed letters, yeah, such as the limits of my language are the limits of my world. This is one of the kind of more famous quotes from the Tractatus. This is a 5.6. That a logical picture of facts is a thought. Another Wittgensteinian claim. Now, what is the status of such claims? Wittgenstein wants to say that claims like this are nonsense. Yeah, so claims like the limits of my language and the limits of my world are nonsense. And there's a sort of split between Wittgenstein scholars as to how to interpret this. The defenders of what's known as the resolute reading such as Connor and Cora Diamond, want to say that sentences like 3 are no different from sentences like 1. They're nonsense in the same way that this is nonsense. Yeah? And that this is a kind of quite radical position. Yeah? And that they then want to push a certain way of thinking of philosophy. That philosophy is just therapeutic, and you just come to see it's all nonsense. Wittgenstein turns out to be Derrida. You know, he's just deconstructing. Yeah.
So in that sense, they second part, elementary propositions in sense, picture of the world. That word is also sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about the string of letters. This is red.
Yeah.
It's also nonsense.
Well, calling. You must know I'm in class, but let me. Okay. Okay, so a sentence like "this is red," I think these guys are going to say, "Oh, that's not nonsense." Well, you might think any sentence that contains the word nonsense is going to be nonsense. Yeah. So saying "this is red" makes sense. Or "this is red" is meaningful. That's going to be nonsense. That "this is red" is nonsense. Is going to be nonsense. This is red is nonsense. Is nonsense. It's going to be nonsense. Yeah. But "this is red" is not going to be nonsense. But the sentence "this is red" is not nonsense. Is nonsense. I don't know. Something like this. Yeah. But whenever you start trying to do philosophy, you just end up doing nonsense. Like really, it is like deconstruction. The text sort of deconstructs itself, and you're just like thinking it's all nonsense. So this is the rest of it wants to claim that the limits of my language, the limits of my world, is nonsense in the same way that gobbledygook is nonsense. It's just a meaningless string of symbols. Yeah. This is the reading of Pura Diamond. And how do you spell his name? Conant, James Conant. The alternative reading is that there is a difference between gobbledygook and the limits of my language and the limits of my world. Because sentences like this, when in the context of the Tractatus, can show us something about language that can be said. Yeah, that through sentences like this, we can learn something. We learn to kind of, we gain some sort of insight. The sentences like this can show us something. They display something, even though they can't say what they want to say. And this kind of, the sort of reading of the resolute reading wants to say these are really on a par. The reading of people like Hannah wants to say no. 3 and 1 are quite different. Both of them are nonsense. Yeah, but sentences like this, we can say things can be nonsense that can help us see something. Yeah, that can be said. Yeah. So, I mean, so this sort of second reading is, there's a certain kind of mysticism to it. And there's this kind of, I think Wittgenstein has a sort of mystical side, because one of the central questions is about the status of the ineffable. Do people come across this expression, ineffable? Something is ineffable if it can't be said. Yeah, and that which can't be said is sort of mysterious. Yeah, so this is why there's sort of the mysticism. Yeah, but my sort of reading is that Wittgenstein does think that what he says in the Tractatus has a different type of status than just gobbledygook. Yeah, like he's doing something with his words in a way that is illuminating. Yeah, so this is one of the major views. Then we also have statements like either it is raining or it is not raining. This is going to be a tautology, and it is raining and it is not raining. Contradiction. And what's Wittgenstein going to say about sentences like these? So one of the things he's interested in is logic. And do people know what he says about tautologies and contradictions? Okay. Yeah, so, well, yeah. A tautology is necessarily true. A contradiction is necessarily false. What does that say about their meaning? Yeah, so what? So this is on page 441. So he makes a distinction between elementary propositions that consist of names, and elementary propositions say something about the world. Yeah, so an elementary empirical claim says something about the world. It says that the world is in one particular way rather than another. Yeah, that tautologies and contradictions, Wittgenstein wants to say, are senseless. Yeah, they don't say anything. Yeah? But of course, they're not nonsense. So one of the important distinctions Wittgenstein wants to draw is between certain claims that are senseless but aren't nonsense. And it's going to turn out that the truth of mathematics, Wittgenstein thinks, are truth of logic. So they're the truth of mathematics are necessarily true. They're reducible to sort of logical truth. He brought into this logicism of Russell. And therefore, the truth of mathematics don't say anything. They don't have any empirical content. Yeah, they don't say anything about the way the world is in any useful way. So yeah, so he in 4.46 on page 41, he introduces the distinction between tautologies and contradictions. So he says in one of these cases, the proposition is true for the truth possibility of the elementary positions. We say that the truth conditions are tautological. In the second case, the proposition is false, or the truth possibilities, the truth conditions are contradictory. In the first case, we call the proposition a tautology. In the second, a contradiction. So it's not obvious that you've got a proposition here. The proposition is supposed to be a sort of sentence with a sense. Yeah, and it's going to turn out that tautologies and contradictions lack sense. Yeah. So he says propositions say what they show what they say. Tautologies and contradictions show that they say nothing. A tautology has no truth conditions since it is unconditionally true. So there's no way the world has to be for a tautology to be true or false. A tautology doesn't have any empirical content. A contradiction doesn't have any empirical content. So tautologies and contradictions lack sense. Yeah. For example, I know nothing about the weather when I know that it is either raining or not raining. So one theory seems to suggest that the idea of having sense, there's an epistemological side to it. That if you come to learn that a proposition is true, you come to know something. But you don't come to know anything new by coming to know that a tautology is true. Because a tautology doesn't tell you anything about the world. So tautologies and contradictions lack sense. Tautologies and contradictions are not, however, nonsensical. They are part of the symbolism, much as zero is part of the symbolism of arithmetic. Yeah? Tautologies and contradictions are not pictures of reality. They do not represent any possible situation. For the former admit all possible situations and the latter none. Yeah?
I mean, like the present of Francis Ball.
Yeah, so I think he just goes with Russell on that. So he thinks that so as I said before, I think the Tractatus Wittgenstein is in this kind of ideal language guy. He's offering up this sort of ideal language, which is the language of logic. And then a sentence is meaningful if it's translatable into elementary propositions or propositions that are kind of logical constructs out of that. And one kind of thing we can do in logic is we can have quantifiers. Yeah. So one of the things he talks about are the sort of meanings of complex propositions that have quantifiers in. And I guess for these sort of empty names, he's just going to go with Russell. So he's going to say that these definite descriptions look like names, but they're not names. Yeah, and so what may look like a name in our everyday language, once we provide a full analysis of our everyday language, we'll see that what looks grammatically like a name isn't actually a name. So I think
somewhere it doesn't say that names are symbols.
Yeah, so I mean, so I think Wittgenstein thinks, according to his theory of language, names necessarily kind of the relationship between a name and its referent, there's a sort of necessity there. Now, once again, this is a problem because he thinks there's no necessity in the world. But he thinks that, I think he's committed to the idea that the idea of an empty name is a contradiction. Yeah, if you've got an empty name, then you've got something that is, and so once again, there's so yeah, so let's suppose you've got kind of Sherlock is clever, yeah, and Sherlock doesn't exist. And let's suppose you think that fictional objects don't exist. Yeah, so let's suppose you. Now, here you've got something where you've got something that is syntactically functioning as a name. Yeah, so the kind of grammatically, this is playing the role of a name. But this, if we don't believe in fictional objects, then we might say that this string of letters lacks a sense. Yeah, it doesn't have a sense. Now, Wittgenstein, I think, doesn't tell us when he talks about fictional characters. Yeah, are these really names? Is there really an object, fictional object? You could go Meinongian and just say that there is an object. But let's suppose we think there isn't. Then that being a name, yeah, you might think one view of a name is to be a name is to be something that plays a particular syntactic role in a sentence. So you might indicate something is a name in terms of the grammatical role it plays. I think Wittgenstein thinks it's more than that. So in order for an element of a proposition to have a sense, there's got to be some connection to reality. Yeah. So something that doesn't have a sense. So the sense of a name. Yeah, I think there's a kind of two-ply semantics. That first of all, a name is something that has a particular type of syntactic role within a sentence, and that's ineliminable. But then a name also has a reference, and that's sort of essential to its being a name. So the idea of an empty name is empty. There are no, in this ideal language, there are no empty names. Now, in our everyday English, there are empty names. Yeah, but in a fully analyzed language, you're going to only have the only names. There's not going to be any non-empty names. And then the question is, well, how can you guarantee that? Yeah, and this might push you towards a sort of sense-making perspective. Yeah, so you might think that the only names are going to be things like demonstratives. You know, this is how Russell was pushed. This is red, where this points kind of picks out a kind of a point in visual space. Yeah, and then you say is red. This point in visual space has a yeah, so I think in the language of the Tractatus, a name essentially is non-empty. Because if you had non-empty names, then you wouldn't have this isomorphism between the language and the world. Yeah. Sorry. So what are we talking about? Yeah. So so one of the central claims is going to be about this. The next class, I want to say a bit about what Wittgenstein has to say about logic and logical propositions. So one of the key claims is that, oops, sorry, am I still here? Okay, yeah, I did. Wait, I'm just making sure. Can you hear me online? Okay. Yeah, so one of his key claims is going to be at 4.0312. That's a bit of a mouthful. I like it when it's kind of 4 or 4.1, but 4.0, in the forwards, things get really messy. This is on page, yeah, this is on page 26. So he says, and you'd think he says, my fundamental idea, if it's a fundamental idea, why did you put it in 4.0312 rather than in kind of, why didn't you just start a new section with my fundamental idea? Why kind of have it in 4.0312? This is the main point of my essay. The main point of my essay is to get a footnote. Yeah, so he says, my fundamental idea is that the logical constants are not representatives, that there can be no representative of the logical facts. So logical constants are not representatives. I think this, we'll talk about his understanding of logic next class. The logical constants are not names. Yeah, this is going to be central. And in particular, they're not names of relations. Yeah, so you might think that if then is a name of a certain type of relation. Yeah, you've got a certain type of grounding relation. Yeah, and if then the logical consequence names a sort of some type of relationship. I think this is something you find in Kant. So Kant thinks that our concept of cause is an application of the logical relation of so Kant thinks we've got this hypothetical form of judgment, which is the if-then form of judgment. Our hypothetical judgment is a judgment that relates to judgments. So if today is Tuesday, if today is Wednesday, then Lucas must teach a class. Then you've got an if-then judgment that relates to judgments. And he thinks this gives us two kind of logical concepts, the concepts of logical ground and logical consequence. And then he thinks that our material concept of causation is a sort of application of these concepts to objects in space-time. So that the real relation of causation is somehow related to the logical if-then relationship. And so we might think that the ground consequence, this if-then relationship, is a sort of name. It's a name of a certain type of relation we can find in the world, a relation of something like grounding. And I think by saying that logical constants are not names, the logical constants are going to be and, or, not, and then arrow, if then. But one of the things that falls out of this is he sort of denies the existence of causation in the world. Yeah, there's no causation in reality. There's no yeah, because, and this is like Humeanism on steroids. So Hume thinks, you know, there's no necessary connection. There's just this subjective necessary connection. Wittgenstein thinks the only necessity that exists is logical necessity, and this is a sort of relationship between propositions having to do with how truth. And so, yeah, this denial of causation is quite. So, where this is something he talks about. So one problem is this one is sort of upside down. Yeah, well, yeah, but so elementary propositions are pictures of reality. That we construct these propositions out of elementary propositions. But these propositions with logical things in rely on the fact that elementary things, but they don't picture the world. Yeah. So
the elementary propositions are they not illogical?
What?
Illogical. I mean, not part of not constructed out of logical.
Yeah. So the thing is that the elementary. So there can be no real opposition between elementary propositions. So the truth of one elementary proposition can't exclude the truth of another one. Bit problematic. They're sort of independent of each other, which then turns out to be a crazy idea that Wittgenstein came to see. Yeah, but these elementary propositions are first of all, they're contingent. So the negation of any elementary proposition has to be possible. Yeah. And secondly, that the truth of any elementary proposition, they're all independent of each other. Yeah. And this independence, yeah, because otherwise they weren't independent, there'd be some sort of necessity in the world. And Wittgenstein doesn't want any necessity in the world. And then he has a problem. So what was I going to talk about? So we've talked about these three things. So I want to talk a little bit about elementary propositions. And then I want to talk about a bit more about what he has to say about this type of proposition and what he has to say about philosophy. What time is it now? Okay, so we've got some time, yeah. Hold on. Okay, so yeah, so these sort of propositions, these contingently true propositions, these are pictures. And these pictures consist just of names. So in 422, let's have a look at 422. Yeah, he says, so the sense of a proposition is its agreement and disagreement with possibilities of existence and non-existence of states and affairs. The simplest kind of proposition, an elementary proposition, asserts the existence of a state of affairs. So an elementary proposition asserts the existence of a state of affairs. And a state of affairs, remember, is going to be a combination of objects. Yeah. So a state of affairs is a combination of objects. As I suggested before, we've got the world, we've got animals, we've got, let's say we've got proper names, we've got predicates and relation terms. So we've got like A, B, C. We've got P. Then we've got, let's say we've got F, G, and then we've got relations. Yeah. Yeah. Now, predicates, according to this, we've got all of these are migrating into names. So we have names of individuals, we've got names of properties, and we've got names of relations. Yeah, so you might have Lucas, predicate is happy, relation is to the left of. Yeah, and here we have individuals, properties, and relations. And then states of affairs are, and these are all objects. States of affairs are these objects connected in various ways. So you could have one state of affairs, Lucas and happy. Lucas is happy, so we use this to express it. Lucas is to the left of Zubede. Lucas loves Zubede. You know, like these are all possible states of affairs. And then the facts are the states of affairs that occur at any particular moment, or that occur at any particular moment. So the states of affairs, this is the realm of possibility. States of affairs gives you, the possible states of affairs gives you everything that's possible. And then what's actual is a particular subset of the state of affairs. Yeah. And the simplest kind of proposition is an elementary proposition. It asserts the existence of a state of affairs. And it's a sign of a proposition's being elementary, but there cannot be an elementary proposition contradicting it. Yeah, so there can be no relation of necessity. Now, an FA and GA, yeah, logic going to be logically independent if F and G really are predicates. And of course, this seems a bit crazy because, like, he's red, he's green. You might think the fact that something is red excludes it from being green. And this claim about elementary propositions is something that Wittgenstein in the 30s came to see was false, and this led to the collapse of his sort of semantics from the Tractatus. Yeah. So the sign of a proposition being elementary is that there can be no elementary propositions contradicting it, because there can be no necessity in nature. The only necessity you have is going to be in language, in logic. So an elementary proposition consists of names. So this is going to be important. So an elementary proposition consists of names. And I'm thinking, like, we've got this regimented language, and so in the sort of language of logic, A is not a proposition, F is not a proposition, R is not a proposition, but FA. Yeah, so we have a list of proper names. Wittgenstein talks about predicates and relations. I take it today that we think this distinction is not a radical distinction. We think there are just in-place predicates. Yeah, so we have things like F is a one-place predicate. So we can have, you know, just take one. We might have R, which is a two-place predicate. G, I don't know, T triple is a three-place predicate, and the like. And so the proper names that are names of individuals. And then we have predicates, which are also going to be names of properties and relations. So that's my reading of what he's saying here. Now, some readers of the Tractatus think that Wittgenstein's a nominalist, and so all you get in names of objects, of individuals, and somehow you cash out the relations in various ways. In today's logic, I think the standard semantics is to take predicates to be names. Have you come across if you've done logic, have you done logic? Logic 2? Yeah, so how are predicates names? Yeah, so the sort of post-Wittgensteinian understanding of predicates, which I think maybe Carnap came up with, definitely by Quine, is that things like A are going to be names of individuals. One-place predicates are going to be names of sets. Yeah, so you've got an individual, and then you've got a set. Yeah, so red is a name of a set. It's a set of all the red things. And then sort of saying that A is red is just saying at the level of semantics that you've got this object here, and then you've got this set here, and then you've got the sort of membership relationship. So what makes predication true is that this name's an individual, this name's a set of individuals, and what makes what makes predication true is that the individual picked out is a member of the set that the predicate picks out. So this is a sort of extensional view of predicates. That is red is just the name of the set of all the red objects. Now that's the sort of reference of red. Yeah, is red refers to the set of all red objects. Lucas refers to this individual, and then Lucas is red is false because I haven't been to the beach recently. No, Lucas is red is false because Lucas is not a member of the set of objects picked out by the predicate is red. That's the sort of idea. And then relations, two-place relations are taken to be sets of ordered pairs. So I think this idea that predicates are names, this is the kind of view that is now the sort of standard view but this is probably, were you taught this when you did? Yes. Yeah. So you have the idea that predicates are names. Yeah. I mean, so. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I use small letters for names of individuals, large letters for predicates. Yeah. So this is the sort of picture. So an elementary proposition consists of names. It is a nexus, a concatenation of names. Yeah. So Lucas is red. Now, one thing is, what about the is? I guess is red is the name of a property. Yeah, so it's not red that's the name. I think it's going to be the predicate is going to be is red, and is red names a sort of property. But if we translate this into kind of a logical form, we've got a predicate and we've got an individual. Yeah, and then he says it's obvious. Whenever a philosopher says something is obvious, You should read it. You should read the thing. Hold on a minute. Yeah, it's obvious that the analysis of propositions must bring us to elementary propositions, which consist of names in immediate combination. Yeah. So we've got these elementary propositions, which are names in immediate combination. Is then it's going to turn out that you've got these complex propositions that contain logical operators, which are going to be explained in truth functional terms. Yeah. So we've got we don't learn anything new by doing logic. Yeah, logic doesn't give us anything more than we already have. We can't gain any more empirical knowledge through logic. Yeah. Yeah. But then we have statements like the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And I think it yeah, I mean, it's going to turn out that I is not a name. Yeah. I referring to the metaphysical subject. I take it the idea of the limits of language. Yeah, the limits of thought is something that cannot be named. Yeah, so given his semantics, it's going to turn out that you can't say anything about the limits of thought, because the limits of thought, to have an idea of the limits of thought, you have to be able to think something that's not thinkable. But to have an idea of the limits of thought means being able to think something beyond the limit. But that's impossible. So we can't talk about the limits of our thought. Yeah? So these sort of expressions are going to be are going to be nonsense according to his theory of language. Now, let's have a look at philosophy. Yeah, so starting on page 29, he says a bunch of stuff about philosophy. So it says propositions, and here he's talking about elementary propositions, 4.1, represent the existence and non-existence of states of affairs. So an elementary proposition basically represents the existence and non-existence of states of affairs. And an existent state of affairs, what's his word? What's the word? Another word for an existent state of affairs? What is a state of affairs that exists? A fact. Yeah, and the world is the sum of all the facts. So a state of affairs that exists is an actual state of affairs. It's a fact. And you've got other states of affairs that are not actual. They're non-actual states of affairs, merely possible. But we're able to think of the possibility because we can think of the things that actually exist being combined in different ways. So all sort of thoughts of non-existent things. So if we're thinking of something we're able to think of things that don't exist because we're able to think of things that do exist, think of objects that do exist, and think of them combined in ways differently from the way they actually are combined. Yeah, so Lucas could be to the left of Zubedi, but we could swap places. Yeah, and so there's a way of combining Lucas to the left of Zubedi, yeah, differently. So Wittgenstein's got a certain conception of actuality and possibility. He's got some sort of modal theory, and we can sort of represent possibilities. All representations of possibility is a matter of combinatorics. We've got a basic set of objects that necessarily exist. The objects in the world don't change, the fundamental objects. The only thing that changes is the way in which they're related to each other. Now we might think, hold on a minute, what about when people die? Oh, anything that dies can't be a fundamental object. Yeah, the fundamental objects are going to be the kind of fundamental particles that make up the universe. Yeah, and the totality of true propositions is the whole of natural science, or the whole corpus of the natural sciences. Yeah, so natural science has empirical content, and yeah, only these sort of propositions have empirical content. I see we're running out of time. Should we talk about philosophy next class? Some fun? And next week we'll do an extra class on Wednesday. Is that, are people up for that? Or if people can't make it, there are many of you. If next Wednesday at the same time isn't good, we could find another time. Okay. Let's talk about it. And if it turns out that that time doesn't work, we could try and find another one. But let's say we'll. Okay. Bye-bye.